What's going on, you guys? My name is Philip. I'm going to talk a little bit about, the pretty much like a roadmap of how to start your own business. So, obviously the first step to starting any business is, forming, an LLC or, structure, however is going to fit best for you, because you want to make sure that you're protected legally. And, if you end up damaging something, which, if you know what you're doing, that's very rare of an instance, but if you do end up damaging something so they can't sue you personally, they would just come after your business. So, forming an LLC is super important. And also, obviously, that fits into picking a good business name, because, you want to tailor your business name specifically to, what services you're going to be doing. So, if you're doing aviation refinement, you don't want to name yourself, something weird like lights cleaning or whatever. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. So, picking the right name is super key, to a super big key to your success, because you want to, express kind of what you do in your business name. And another big important thing is, having the proper insurance, because for aviation refinement, you can't just use any liability insurance, because there's specific things that have to be covered that most insurance companies don't cover. So, you have to make sure, you have to know who to reach out to. Make sure you're reaching out to the right people for that insurance. So just remember, forming the business itself, and then doing all those three things. So the next thing would be picking your audience. So, that's picking your audience as in, whether you want to focus on small aircraft, whether you want to focus on big aircraft, or, whether you want to focus fully just on helicopters, or, whatever it is that you want to do. You have to find and pick the audience and, go with that audience and become really good at doing what you do, specifically tailored to, what you plan to do. And that's kind of the same thing with the services. You have to, pick the services that you want to offer, whether you want to offer everything or whether you want to specialize in one certain specific thing. You have to, really know and understand what you're doing, audience and services. You just have to tailor whatever you're doing specifically to your business. So you could offer all the services, which is what my business does, or like I said, you could just specifically become really good at one service and offer that one service. So I'll write that down here. And then, obviously with the services, there comes products. So you have to kind of know and understand what products are used for what. So, you can't just go out, if you get a client, you can't just go out and use glass clean on an airplane. Like, the products have to be specialized for whatever it is you're using, because, there's certain products that you could use on the windscreen. There's certain products that you could use on the nose, on the interior. Like, there's certain products for everything. So, you have to make sure that you're buying the right products. So, buy the proper products, know what they're used for, and, don't cross-contaminate products, for the interior, don't use that on the outside, and what's for the outside, don't use that for the inside. And, like I just said, each service has a different product, so it's super, super important that you make sure and you understand that portion of this business. Another thing is, make sure that whenever you're ordering stuff, you're being cost efficient. So don't just order, enough product for one or two jobs, because that's going to end up costing you a lot more in the long run. You have to make sure that, when you're ordering products, you order not in super heavy bulk, but in somewhat bulk, because that's going to cut down costs on operation and make your profit margin a lot higher. So, it's super important, obviously, with any business to stay efficient and to stay profitable. So that's a big, big thing, is making sure that you're ordering products, in bulk or in, medium-sized bulk, whatever that looks like to you. So it's cost efficient, but also you're not ordering more than you need. And again, like I said before, it's super important to make sure you're using the correct products on the correct parts of the aircraft. Like I said, don't use something that's intended for the lab. Don't use that on the gears of the airplane. You have to really make sure and understand, what you're doing, because that's a great way to mess something up, to damage something, to break something. If you put, a chemical on a place that doesn't belong, that could really damage the aircraft in a really, really big way. The next step to, starting aviation refinement is finding clients. So, obviously without clients, you won't have a business. So, like I said before, find your audience, whether you want to focus on big airplanes, small airplanes, helicopters, or everything. You have to make sure that you're reaching the right audience. And, there's a certain type of way to get clients with this business. So just whenever you're, looking for those clients, make sure that you're reaching out to the proper people, because, if you're looking to do big jets and, you're reaching people that own the smaller airplanes, then you're obviously not, getting the right audience. So, if you want to find your proper audience and work on the clients that you want to work on, just remember to make sure you have the proper knowledge, and, make sure that you're reaching the right audience, because, You know, if you spent money on certain products that are meant for big, not big aircraft, but obviously if you bought a whole bunch of metal polish and, you know, you get clients that are like 182s and stuff, then, you know, they don't really have metal unless it's like a fully polished skin. And, you know, after you find those clients, you know, you have to try and use them for referrals for future work, whether that's just a recommendation where you do a good enough service that they're willing to, you know, vouch for your work. Try to use your current clients to get, you know, more clients in the future. So whenever you go out and do any type of service, make sure you do a really good job, because, you know, these type of referrals in this business is literally key to growing. And so the next step I'll just write down is clients. And with the clients, like I already said, you always want to make sure that they're satisfied. So, you know, if they just want you to do the exterior of the airplane, let's say your target audience is you want to start doing smaller aircraft, you know, if they just ask for an exterior, maybe you tell them you would throw in an interior for free, just to make sure that they're satisfied, because customer relationships in this business are super big important key to staying in business and growing your business. So always make sure that you go above and beyond with whatever you do, because that's how you grow. Another big thing, important thing, is specializing in one specific service. So I'll use myself for an example. My business offers all the services that are in this aviation refinement industry, but my business specifically is known for bright work. So, you know, we get a lot of jobs out of state. You know, I've been to California, Oregon. We even went to Catalina Island for, you know, some projects because of our expertise in bright work specifically. So, you know, we get called out to do super rare, you know, World War II or, you know, older vintage aircraft that are huge, like DC-3s. You know, we worked on the Connie. And, you know, people know us because we specialize in this service, even though we offer all services. But, you know, if you become really good at one service and, you know, there's a certain niche audience for that type of service and you become very well known for that, that's a great way to spread your business name around. And, you know, the reason I decided to kind of get really, really good at, you know, doing bright work is because that's one of the highest paying things in this type of business is bright work. And, you know, if you're doing these big DC-3s or, you know, these World War II planes, you know, the people that own those are most of the time really wealthy, you know, collectors of aircraft. So they have multiple aircraft on the fleet. So if you specialize in one service, whether that's bright work, whether that's being really good at doing carpets, whether that's really good at even just cleaning the airplanes, you know, if you specialize in one thing, even though you offer everything, that's a great way to grow your business. So I'll write that down next. So like I already mentioned, you know, my business is very well known for bright work, and that's why we get these really, really big jobs, is because, like I already mentioned, we do specialize in one service, but we offer all services. So a big key important thing to growing is just, you know, picking one service that you think you would be really good at, perfecting it. Even if you decide to offer everything, you're more than welcome to do that, but being good at one thing specifically is really going to help you grow and stand out in this business. So that's kind of like the key, you know, the roadmap to how you start your own business. You know, just remember these key points. Just forming your business, you know, everything that I mentioned that goes into that. You know, the services, pick and decide what services you want to offer, if you want to do all of them or just some of them. You know, finding the clients, obviously make sure that you're reaching the right audience with whatever it is that you want to do, and then find one service that you can excel in. So you could offer all the services like I mentioned already, but just find one that you could stand out in, and that's going to be, you know, a really big and important thing to grow. And I want to talk a little bit about, you know, some of the most difficult things I've come across in this business. You know, obviously, like I mentioned, with these really big projects that we do, they take quite a while. You know, whenever I go do one of these really big, rare, you know, older airplanes that are, you know, super special niche, which is what my business is known for, you know, it takes a long time. It takes a month of literally working every single day. And so, you know, I think towards probably week 2.5 into the project, you get really tired, you know, because you're obviously, it's a lot of you guys probably don't even know what I'm talking about when I say DC-3, but it's a huge, huge airplane. And, you know, every single square inch of that has to be completed. And, you know, that requires a lot of man hours. And so, you know, I think the services themselves aren't difficult, but if you're working on these super niche and big projects, really the number one thing, most difficult thing that I come across is just getting tired throughout, you know, maybe week 2. But, you know, it's always super rewarding. You know, it's super high pay. You know, I'm super, super grateful for this business and that I have the opportunity to do it. So, you know, if you guys are interested in starting aviation refinement, this is kind of, you know, the roadmap to how to do that. And if you guys want, you know, some more help, you know, because obviously some of the steps like getting clients, getting, using the proper products, the proper information about aviation, because you can't start any business, you know, if you don't know anything about it. So if you guys want to learn more about aviation and, you know, dive more in depth about how to get clients, you know, how to use the products properly, what products you even need to buy, I provide more value on my Instagram. You guys could shoot me a DM, you know, we can talk about it and see if it's the right fit for you and see if this is something that's worth getting into for you. So like I said, you know, just shoot me a DM on Instagram. I'll leave a link below in my description.